I have a theory about something I consider obvious. The obvious thing is the left has gone crazy. And my theory, which I guess is just a conjecture, an elaborate one, is, I think, worth talking about. So welcome to the Locofoco Netcast. I will discuss my basic theory, and then I'm going to cut to a conversation I had with James Gill, and that will explore an element of why the left has gone crazy. It's an interesting subject. We live in interesting times. What are the main points of the craziness of the left? I think it might be involved with something like this. The left has purged itself of its good ideas. The left is more cultic and tribal than ever. Leftists are unable to even tolerate, much less understand, non-leftist thoughts and points of view. And leftists are panicking that their stranglehold on the culture's commanding heights is being regularly and effectively challenged. So that's the basic position that I see is going on right now. Leftists are not liberal anymore. In fact, the left is not liberal any longer is a Dave Rubin truism, but the modern progressivist left has always been a changeling liberalism, and it's important to recognize that those on the left, and those even leaning left 50 years ago, weren't liberals either. And people who called themselves liberals in America have not really been liberals since Hobhouse and FDR. That's L.T. Hobhouse, a British philosopher, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who basically took the term liberalism and applied it to a nationalist progressivism. And when I say the left has purged itself of its good ideas, I'm saying that the old attempt to marry liberal ideas with socialism and technocracy via a neo-mercantilist plutocracy was always barely even plausible. Most progressives hated the very idea of limited government, for example. This is important. The hatred of limited government is a non-liberal position. And TR, that is Teddy Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they had very little interest in the Constitution of the United States, for instance. They hated it, basically. It was something to work around. Well, the Constitution is a feeble and not very successful attempt to limit government. And if you don't limit government, you cannot have liberty. Liberty is kind of defined as a limit to government. So what the left is left with is technocracy. A plutocracy it cannot own up to. A class system, a caste system based on credentialism and the dominance of a cognitive elite, and always in the background the sweet dream of state socialism and the worship of the state. This is the essence of progressivism. Now, what gets weird about the left and progressivism and statism in all forms, but especially on the left, is that it's an in-group politics with a Pharisaic out-group pandering, constantly pandering to out-groups. Whatever in-group they're fixing on taking over or solidifying or whatever, they pretend to be an out-group, and they're doing it for the cause of the out-groups, the outsiders, the downtrodden, the oppressed. That is their business. That is their stock in trade. That is what they're up to. And they do it with a cultic fervor. And like all cults, the current woke progressive statism has exoteric and esoteric doctrines. If you're a cultist, the trick is not to acknowledge, if at all possible, the esoteric doctrines, the secret inside stuff, treating them as sub rosa or tacit knowledge, and often even denying them in public. The outgroup orientation, the inclusionist public doctrine, and the political stance is obvious. It's everywhere in modern progressivism, and in fact that is the woke left today. And then, of course, there's the problem. They're very selective on which outsiders they glom onto and valorize as victims. Only some groups count as outsiders. Leftists are amazingly classist in America and elsewhere, and hatred of the non-college grad working class is astounding. This is, of course, one of the most obvious things about leftism today. Woke progressivism, everything. How much they hate flyover country. They hate basically evangelical Christianity, especially the fundamentalist varieties. They just loathe all that stuff. And they often wear it on their sleeves now. They're openly contemptuous. It's an astounding thing, and it gets weird when you realize that the people that they hate the most are really truly outsiders. They have very little power, and they certainly have no cultural power. They get no respect on CNN or MSNBC or ABC or NBC, all that. Some of the valorized victim groups are peculiar, of course, and this has been often noted. I mean, to make a big deal of including Muslims, for example, means developing a dislike for all non-Muslim religious people, Christians especially. But let's get real here. Muslims are not a natural constituency. There's nothing about Islam that's woke progressive, almost nothing. But what it is Muslims are treated very bad by the federal government of the United States now, and it has been for quite a long time. Muslims in foreign countries are regularly killed en masse for strategic reasons or whatever. It's very, very bad. And I've been against it since I've been against all that since 9/12/2001, if not since the first Gulf War with George Herbert Walker Bush, who I despised, and Cheney. Oh, what a horror show that man was. Anyway, the hatred of Christianity is a special case and wouldn't be necessary except, statism is a religion. It's a cult. And Christianity is a religion, and it would be basically a false god to the statists. When I grew up as a Christian, I was taught to be on the lookout for modern forms of idolatry. Well, statists have the same idea, and they look at Christianity as idolatry. It's worshipping something they can't see instead of worshipping the state as the solution to all our problems. And since Christianity is historically associated with the rise of Western civilization, which those dedicated to defense of outsiders must then treat as a despised, oppressive in-group hierarchy, well, what do we say about that? Well, it's part of their whole in-group politics based on Pharisaic out-group pandering. But here's the interesting part. Any successful political movement forms a new powerful in-group hierarchy, and those outside it are actual out-groups. And the new in-group inevitably shores up its own position with exclusionary politics and social marginalization. So when a leftist succeeds, they must become and act like rightists. They can still pretend to be for the outsider, and they may do so hysterically to compensate for the fact that they have power, but they are really, and they must, have an outgroup that they despise, and that outgroup is, of course, white Christian males in America and conservatives and things like that. They have no interest in compromising with those because they regard them as the despised in-group, but of course they were the out-group. So the left is the right, and the right is the left. It's just one of these weird things about life in our time. We should not be surprised to witness the current droll irony of modern woke progressivism, a relentless exclusionism, fiercely hateful, and even given to marginalizing. That's because the more power you have, the more you become right-wing. That's sort of how we define left and right, and I'll get to that later on. But of course, progressivism has always been about capturing the educational establishment and media and entertainment industries. Once captured, ideas that don't fit progressive technocratic class-based elitism have been routinely spurned, even suppressed, from the beginning of the progressive era. All of this was in evidence in the Obama administration. It has only become more hysterical after progressives were robbed of their rightful place in Washington, D.C. by the election of the much-hated Donald J. Trump. Indeed, the resistance to Trump on the left, and among centrist never-Trumpers, has upped the hysteria levels and brought out the inner logic of leftism, defense of the outsiders at the expense of the in-group hierarchy, and since they were now on the outs, it proves easy to maintain the basic conceit and not appear as right-wingers. They're now hysterically leftist. Get power again in an important way, they will behave like right-wingers. This is all very tribal, of course, with warring groups competing for the awesome power of the state. It's led to cultic elements, not least a sort of first world cargo cult, where demanding goodies for one's own group does not even make its advocates blanch. Their success at the commanding heights of the culture, in major media and in the academic realm especially, has protected them from criticism, and this has disabled them from debate. They do not even know how to argue against ideas with which they do not agree, because they are now unprepared. They are the most miseducated people in the history of civilization. But, they never really were very good at debate. Their constant marginalization and virtual excommunication of individualists from debate is notorious. The Herbert Spencer example is especially interesting. He was scorned and then dropped from the conversation, early in the 20th century, really early. Ludwig von Mises, a great Austrian economist, fleeing the Nazis, couldn't get a regular academic post in America. And the demonization of figures like Ayn Rand has always allowed leftists not to confront challenging ideas. Just call them awful, evil, maybe icky. Terms of abuse like fascist and even right-winger get bandied about with little thought, and any accusation of racist has prevented public debate in a serious manner on many issues. Constant use of these tropes has turned leftist brains to mush. The upshot of all this is that now leftists cannot even identify the ideas of their opponents. Whether encountering F.A. Hayek or Candace Owens, leftists cannot even adequately repeat their enemy's ideas, even immediately after confronting them. They usually state as basic some position actually explicitly opposed by the non-leftist. So they are left with name-calling, screaming matches, flame wars, abusive Twitter call-outs, and worse. No real debate. Most leftists are incapable of even understanding a non-leftist thought. They simply freak out instead. The straw man argument is now de rigueur, and the ad hominem ubiquitous. All the old logical fallacies just pile up when confronting leftism today. And leftists, having abandoned rationality for obscurantism and emotional blackmail, about all they have left is rationalization of their positions. Not reason, rationalization. Really cheap stuff. They're in full panic mode. They panic now because they see that they could lose their stranglehold on the political process. Their numbers are huge, overwhelming, and they've successfully indoctrinated whole generations. But still, their grasp on power seems slippery. How did they lose to Donald Trump? They thought they would simply march to socialism. Now they might be prevented from that. They are furious. They have also been humiliated. Humiliated that someone as low-cultured as Donald Trump, whom they did not complain about when he was contributing to their causes, could take the presidency from them. Unthinkable. That word, I do not think it means what you think it means. What they cannot admit is that they have been aptly humiliated. Hillary Clinton was a corrupt politician beyond the dreams of hypocrisy and avarice and power lust. They selected her as first woman president, and that betrayed them. They thought that you could just plug in any plausible female into that role, and they found out they could not. Americans did not quite let them. Their sin was pride, hubris. They selected a much-despised politician and thought they could nevertheless push her into office simply because she was a woman and spoke woke. Pride goeth before a fall. But how big a fall? Could they lose their grasp on the major government and government-adjacent institutions of the age? Maybe. But it won't be Trumpism that does that. For a century, progressives in one form or another have commanded the cultural heights of power, even extracting allegiance to their ideas from their political enemies. The next step is not exactly Trumpian, though. It must go way beyond Trump. For a century, progressives marginalized certain opposition ideas. Now they must themselves be marginalized. This marginalization of the left can follow some elements of Trump's success. Ridicule, yes. Downright defiance, yes. But the grounds of the marginalization must be complete and ideological. No one who has ever expressed woke socialism must ever get hold of power. All must be scorned, scorned as if they were members of the KKK, scorned as if they were Nazis, scorned as if they were pedophiles. Some of them are. And the scorn must be justified by good arguments. So who will do this marginalization? It cannot be managed by someone as anti-intellectual and mercurial as Trump. This is total ideological war. The left must be expelled from their Eden and must wander away, forced by circumstance, and make something of themselves not cultist. I don't know if it can be done, but I don't see any other way out. One of the interesting things about how the left has gone crazy in our times is the protests and riots and abolish the police mantra. All the protests make no sense. The police who killed George Floyd have been arrested and charged. Objecting to a charge less than first-degree murder is insane, since it is harder to convict at the first-degree level, and the case almost certainly doesn't warrant first degree. Yet that is kind of what these people have done, right? And by the way, the racism charge doesn't hold. It was a multicultural event by the police. And why are they protesting? To fundamentally change America in what ways? What is Biden up to, by the way, to say he wants to fundamentally change America? What was Obama? Isn't all this happening now just because the corporate media has sparked a race war that disables folks from thinking clearly? There are plenty of non-blacks being killed by police people, or whites being killed by blacks, that were in the news that could have caused race riots the other direction. Never did. Never happened. Never was sparked by the media, because the media wants a certain type of race war. They want the blacks to be seen as the underdog. Makes for good copy, and it makes for maybe an agenda we don't quite understand. My question about protesting, though, is that how often are protests justified? How many laws are broken when shutting down public thoroughfares? Not getting permits? I mean, this is an issue, right? Are participants trying to change minds or ape insurrection? If they're trying to ape insurrection, what are we supposed to do about that? Then we have to know, do we want the insurrection or not? And I'm pretty sure most people don't want their insurrection. We don't want their weird woke socialism. And the riots almost always follow their goofy protests, complete with looting, arson, violence, and even murder. Those riots cannot be wholly dissociated from the protests. And if protests go on while riots go on, there is no real distinction. It is a symbiotic relationship. Protests feed violence and vice versa. This is very strange. If your peaceful protest leads to riots, you may not be responsible. But if you keep protesting and providing moral cover, you become responsible. If your protests keep attracting rioters, looters, arsonists, and insurrectionists, yet you initiate new protests often, and even usually followed by riots, you should consider some other means of political action. Your protests are not working, if you want peace, that is. No matter who instigates a destructive riot, riots are bad. No matter who casts the first stone, so to speak, the second thrower, or third thrower, or the fourth thrower, are not let off the hook. It doesn't matter if it's the FBI, Antifa, or criminal gang. Your looting is your looting. The demand in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and across the nation is now to abolish the police. Have we reached absurdity yet? And here's the absurdity. The idea as stated is ludicrous, but without police to provide the muscle, all those idiotic regulations, mandates, taxes, and special programs that leftists demand cannot be maintained. Socialism without police is like a telephone system with tin cans and string. So these people who want to replace the police with social workers, where are they going to get the money from if they can't use force to collect the taxes? Abolish the police. Though most advocates of this idea do not really know what they are saying, and many outright contradict themselves moment to moment, the general tenor is replace the police with leftist-friendly government agents, who may not start out by carrying guns. Some of these far leftists almost certainly have a familiar agenda. Do to Minnesota and to America what Chavez did to Venezuela. Replace the old police with new police loyal to him, them. It would be great if we could immediately set up security agencies that people could pay for themselves. And if the abolish the police agenda actually is allowed by state governments, that's what we should push for. Private security, community security, paid for voluntarily, by contract. But that's not what we will get. These radicals do not want security. They want to fundamentally transform the country, which means dispossessing the rich and the middle class and commandeering wealth to be run by committee, their committees. Libertarians have every reason to make sure that fundamental rights can be institutionally defended. The traditional means of modern republics is through police forces controlled in a loose democratic manner, following the rule of law. But whatever mechanisms we establish to protect rights, we must remember what states have always traditionally done, and which serves as the key to civilization. States suppress the vendetta. The feud is retaliatory justice and is unjust. Get rid of the police, and you are apt to reestablish a regime of revenge. And indeed, vengeance is already the operative principle of the riots. So we see the tell. Abolish the police, as leftists want to do, would be uncivilized, violent, grossly unjust. Why would they want this? Could it be because they've driven themselves mad? Libertarians must offer civilized conflict resolution, not dystopian nonsense, not utopian unlikelihoods. Sitting back and pontificating about contractual security agents competing on the open market for justice while publicly supporting abolish the police is armchair abdication of responsible politics. So, what about anarchy? Here's a meme that my friend Jim Gill, we'll talk to it in a few minutes, liked. It says, no matter how many times the media says it, this is not anarchy, showing a riot. But anarchy is fishing without a license, building without a permit, buying raw milk from neighbors, getting married without a license. That's anarchy. Give it up, ANCAPs. Your anarchy isn't what the left calls anarchy, and it isn't what the right calls anarchy. You might as well call it poopy capitalism, for it popularly carries a bad odor. You've lost this word, if you ever had it. Anarchists have for too long been associated with the chaos and violence and opposition to private property. There is no need to keep the word. Besides, the originator of the anarcho-capitalist idea did not consider himself an anarchist, and neither did the self-proclaimed anarchists he debated. Panarchism. The basic idea was named, and named well, by Depew. Panarchy. It suggests all the right things and doesn't stink of chaos and violence. Libertarians are not required to be as crazy as leftists are. Libertarians advance a saving principle of civilization. Liberty as a limit to government, as a limit to crime. Backing away from this because you think you are of the left means only that you are irrelevant. So that's probably enough for the time being. That's 2/3 of my presentation on why the left has gone crazy. And now let's talk to Jim Gill. And I'm going to cut to a conversation I had with him a few nights ago in midstream. Here we go. But the thing that was interesting about the left's stance is that though they identify outgroups, outsiders, to hold up to great status, to welcome them in, they don't really show much evidence of liking those groups. Because they don't really care about what happens to those groups.
Well, and presumably, once they're incorporated, they're the in-group and should be opposed.
And that is precisely...
over time, their approach doesn't have any logical...
The leftist stance is to go outside the in-group and uphold the rights of or the interests of an out-group or some outsiders. That's what leftists do. And this is in the name of universalism and universal brotherhood and all these egalitarianism, all those ideas. And those are great ideas. I mean, I like all those ideas to some degree. But what they do is that then they try to bring those people into the in-group, sometimes literally by subsidized immigration. And then they try to upset and overturn the in-group so that they're in power. But once they're in power and they're ensconced in the hierarchy that protects the in-group, they become right-wingers. That is, that now they have to defend against the out-group. So they've basically said that the problem in modern times is that white people, white Christians rule the world, and that's it's all the problems in the world is caused by white male Christians. So what they do is they just say, okay, we bring in all these other groups that are not white Christian males, women of color, women with funny sexual ideas, men with funny sexual ideas, all that kind of stuff, and they become the new constituency for the new in-group. And then all the people who used to be in power in the hierarchies that defended the in-group, those people are displaced and they become the enemy. I'm almost the enemy from the beginning. But once the leftists succeed at what they're doing, then those whom they displaced become the out-group, and that they treat them like right-wingers treat, they say right-wingers treat left, the outsiders. I mean, it happens over and over again. That's one of the reasons you have this dialectic is why are left-wingers so right-wing and why are right-wingers so left-wing? Well, it depends on where their access to power is. When you're out of power, people tend to talk about freedom, for instance. You'll see this with in America. That was a famous meme, you might say, is that the 60s hippies talked about freedom all the time. And they wanted to be free and let alone and live our lives and blah, blah, blah. But when they get in power, their story changes. Well, that's what happens.
It's all about strict control of how people talk and what people say and what they believe and
right and
what programs they get involved with and who they can meet with.
And a person who was talking about free love and freedom in the 1960s, by the late 70s when they were in city councils, were regulating what kind of signs you can put on your business.
And you think this is all due to some sort of migration from in-group to out-group status or out-group to in-group status?
Well, I think that's what defines left and right, is this in-group, out-group orientation, how you approach the in-group, out-group. But I'm really saying is it's really about power, and and how you have it, who has it, and what they do to people who don't have power.
Now,
And
is the left-right spectrum a trick? Is it just a trick to fool us into thinking that our choices are between two things? Because it seems to me that we left and right are just names we give to designate, this group of people who have this sort of, they share this set of values more or less. So we're going to call them left. We could just as easily call them, the Liverpoolians or whatever. The left's just a word. And over here is right. This is a group of people who share a certain set of values. But by setting them up as this binary, spectrum-oriented thing, we exclude, a whole wide universe of others. So it's looking more and more like a trick to me, that left-right spectrum, a way of shutting out other modes of thinking. Am I off on a wrong track here?
well, that's what I used to believe. That's
Okay.
precisely what I believed. Yeah, it's a joke. It's a bad designator. It doesn't make any sense. It gets us. Well, it gives us dualism, right? It gives you have one bad idea against another bad idea, and we really want is a good idea in the middle. Well,
Yeah.
it turns out that's actually what liberalism always was. That is, libertarianism.
But you have to frame it. You have to retain the left-right imagery, though. You say, here's the left, here's the right. The good thing is right here in the middle. Well, I don't think the good thing between left and right is definitely not right here in the middle, because that's where we are right now.
Well, yes and no. There are many ways of being in the middle, because there's left and right on one spectrum, but what if there's another spectrum here like this? And it's not left and right, it's power on one end and freedom on the other. Left and right is about inclusion, exclusion, but what if there is another dimension here?
But a big part of the problem is we've concentrated too much on a single dimension.
Right. But
Okay.
the thing is that what we have to understand is that left and right as exclusion, inclusion strategies or orientations, which is what they are, there is the good about the left, which is defending the other. And there's the good about right, which is defending the in-group. You have to defend both. That's what liberals and libertarians have always been saying this. You have to do it according to principle, right? You just don't uphold one or the other. Rightists tend to want to defend the in-group, which is a natural tendency and is not in any way bad. And leftists want to do what they think is more civilized, which is defend the outsider who's downtrodden or intends to be a victim. That's good as well. That's absolutely. But the problem is that on this spectrum between left and right of this dimension, there is not merely the combination of both, where you defend both, which is kind of where we're at, but there's also left vice and right vice. Left vice is that you defend the outsider to so much that you're attacking and destroying the insiders, that you attack the in-group. So leftists nowadays want to subsidize immigrants from foreign countries so they can take part of our elections to vote in the plunder of society and destroy a somewhat free and prosperous nation. That's what they want to do, because that's their gambit. That's what they're doing. That is left vice. That is a vicious thing to do. Right vice is to defend the in-group so much that you want to destroy some outsiders or outgroups. That's the traditional rightist vice, is that, yeah, we're going to defend our in-group and our in-group, of course, needs to have people procreating and having marriage and so forth. So we're going to persecute the gays, and the people who don't conform, we're going to persecute them, and we're going to kill people in foreign countries because they're a threat to us, even if they're not. That's the right vice. But right virtue is right next to it. Right vice is just the one step beyond it. What we want is people to have left virtue and right virtue, and not have left vice and right vice. And we need the middle ground that has both, but then we need to do that by concentrating on another dimension. And that other dimension is freedom versus tyranny, and freedom versus anarchy. That is, freedom versus chaos. And that there are many ways of doing this, and I think that the compromise between left and right that usually happens in the world we live in is that they go out of their way to avoid freedom, which is the natural and simplest.
Well, here's the compromise that happens over and over again, and it's insanity. Okay, here we have the people who want freedom. Here we have the people who think people need to be controlled. So what's the compromise? Let's just have a little bit of slavery. See, that's not acceptable to me. A compromise between masters and slaves, I don't want that. That's not good. And that seems to be what everybody thinks we mean by a political compromise. Compromising between freedom, slavery, okay, a little bit of slavery. That's not compromise. I mean, liberty or death. That strain of Americanism is the kind of American I am. And if we're going to just keep compromising on freedom over and over again, that's not satisfactory. But what you're saying is we need to compromise on certain dimensions. There are some dimensions upon which we cannot compromise.
Well, actually, I don't agree with that even.
Okay.
I don't look at it that light. We have to always wonder, what is the full dimension of the problem we see? And I don't see freedom versus tyranny as the dimension. I see freedom in the middle, tyranny over here, and over here is the chaos of the war of all against all. So you have what most people would call anarchy on one side and tyranny on the other, and freedom is in the middle. And I think that what we see in a riot is the chaos, the anarchy that we don't like. Tyranny is the crackdown where we make everybody conform to whatever the tyrants say. And the great danger of our time is that the left is so embracing chaos that we're afraid that people are going to go overreact and take tyranny to conquer chaos, and then we're left with tyranny. But we want the compromise to be freedom in the middle. See, that's the thing, is that we have to, what is the dimension we're working with? And I think that libertarians have generally improperly looked at freedom as an extreme in whatever dimension they're talking about. I think it's wrong. I think that they've done it wrong. And I think libertarians are very, very wrong on this. And we're always talking about it as an extreme.
Well, young people of all political persuasions like to imagine themselves as radicals. For whatever reason, it seems to be bred into us. We're going to change the world. You know, we're the new generation that's going to. Is that an old thing, or is that a new development?
Well, that's a natural progress. But the problem is that people have to just understand the reality they're dealing with. And I think that the reality we're dealing with in politics is not between tyranny and freedom. It's between tyranny and chaos. And in between is some form of freedom. Now, I think some more clarity on, because people are getting mucked up. That They call people in Europe who are, socialist in every way except one. They oppose immigration. They oppose unlimited immigration. Therefore, they're right wing. So we have this weird phenomenon where we're calling people right wing who are leftist in every way except one, and that people keep getting themselves swept up in these. What's the name of this phenomenon? It's where you're swept up into groups because of the name. And leftists are really bad about this, but tricking themselves with the words they use. That is, calling something and believing it's going to be. I guess everybody does it. But it just seems like Democrats and leftists are really, really susceptible to that right now, being hypnotized by their own words. And it's happening with the left-right paradigm as well. It just doesn't seem helpful. Now, if you're going to restructure it so the left-right is part of a multidimensional setup or matrix, that makes sense but I have to outright reject the idea that what we need is a compromise between freedom and slavery, which is, I think what a lot of Democrats seem to believe. Or most people in Congress. This seems to be the default political position in America right now, is that here's one side that presumably wants, free enterprise and freedom. That's what the Republicans claim to want. And this side claims to want what? Equality and this very active big government involvement in everybody's life. So we have lots and lots of government and state involvement in people's life, and freedom and freedom. I mean, that's the way the two factions want to present themselves. We both know that they have all sorts of other motives and secret agendas. But these guys say we're all about freedom. These guys say we're all about the state taking care of us all and doing good things. And so the compromise position is less freedom.
Let's do it here. We'll just have less freedom.
Oh, sure.
And that's not a good compromise. That's not a good compromise.
No, of course not. Everywhere we go in politics and society, we are given false dichotomies, where usually we have a spectrum of options, and we only see a small segment of that spectrum. I mean, libertarians have always known this because we draw our little two-dimensional rather than one-dimensional maps, and that's important. And some of us have even drawn three and n-dimensional maps. So there's that. But I just look at it as I think the left, in valorizing outgroups to take over the in-group, which is kind of what the left transit is, in doing that, they waffle between anarchy and tyranny. The leftists are, right now, they're engaged in anarchy. That is, they're engaged in rioting and chaos. But they want their own tyranny. They want to tyrannize the world according to their designs, right? That's what they're up to. And
that is, the rest of the world needs to be coerced into behaving as they want them to behave.
Exactly. And that's left is always doing that. But that's because though they're leftist in the sense of the nature of their politics, their orientation to the out group and then back to take over the in group. That is their transit. It's a sort of a circuit. It's sort of it's an excursion out of the orbit. It's like a comet. They go out of the close orbit of the sun and they go out into the Oort cloud. They collect their stuff and they come back in. That's a little bit of a weird analogy, I guess. But Oort clouds don't usually come into discussions of politics. But my point being that they have an orientation and a transit that goes out of the in group to get outsiders in, and in that transit, that is the left mindset. That is what they do all the time. But in that transit, they approach chaos and they use chaos to bring in their form of tyranny. And they are tyrants, because we know they are all tyrants, because what they want is socialism or technocracy or heavy regulations and all that stuff, all the normal progressive nonsense. These are people who basically, except for the policy regarding the Jews, would have loved, and the Jews in warfare, because this was a very rightist element of Hitler, is that he engaged in warfare, he had dumped on the outsiders. But aside from that, he treated the Germans like they would love to treat Americans.
Oh, the Reich was the ultimate welfare state, right?
Exactly, and it had amazing programs for egalitarianism in its society. So
do we disserve ourselves by clinging to the left-right model? Because it seems to give people a way to camouflage their true intentions. Well, it doesn't seem. What good does it do us to propagate the left-right way of looking at the world? It seems like it does more harm than good.
Well, that's what I used to say, like I said, until I developed my current model, which is basically to see what left and right tendencies are, and to realize that in any ideology, people tend to change their spots depending on how close they are to power. I used to say we should jettison left and right because it's so stupid. Because none of them are consistent.
Now you're saying we should just see left as right as one dimension in a multidimensional world.
Yes.
And it seems to be a dimension are we focusing overly much on this dimension, or is it just that it's somehow become prominent because of historical factors? I don't know.
It's also due to sex. There's a huge element of sexual selection styles involved in left and right. The posturing people.
Group, would it be better to change the name from left and right to in and out?
Well, yeah, that is actually, yeah, that's.
We get in trouble with spatial metaphors, even with time. Time isn't space. The past is not there, and the future is not up there. Yeah. That's a game we play. Yeah. It's telling us something about time, but it's also hiding something about time.
Which is why that's so interesting that there's that one group in South America whose metaphor for time is that instead of looking forward to the future, they look backwards, because you can see the past and you're walking backwards into the future. That's how they looked at it, and that was their metaphor, and that is a brilliant metaphor. Actually, I thought of that before I even read about these people.
And just a switch in your focus like that can have profound effects, I think, on the choices you make going forward.
Yeah.
We need to do some tinkering, I guess, on the way we look at our positioning in the social political world.
Right.
Something about the way we're doing it is confusing us more than it's helping us.
Oh yeah.
And maybe your insight about treating it less of a totality and more of a single dimension makes sense. But
Well, left-right only talks about certain orientations in the way they think about the world and what they're actually doing in their politics. It doesn't really talk about, it doesn't directly affect.
What good does it do to call Le Pen, for instance, a right winger, when the only thing presumably right wing about him is being anti-immigration? Everything else is highly socialistic, highly managed society. And my understanding is that that's true of a lot of the American alt-right. Sticks pointed out, and I think if it's not Sticks, it may have been Tim Pool, but one of those guys has pointed out many times. Michael Malice is one who's pointed out that the alt-right, the really far, far right, are socialist in every way except for their anti-immigrant stand.
Right.
And that's a problem that's not being indicated in our language. It's confusing people.
Right.
One likes immigrants and the other doesn't. That's the only difference between these two groups on the edges. They're both, big government, managed society, all of the presumptions that come along with socialism and redistribution. Both of them, both the far right and the far left, seems to be in total agreement on everything except race and immigration.
Basically, the alt-right today believes everything that FDR said. That is, what FDR stood for or Woodrow Wilson stood for, that's what they were for. They just want big government, but they want to do it in a nationalistic way rather than in this current pan-nationalist, anti-nationalist, bring in the immigrants to destroy the white Christian males of the America. That's the left's current outlook on what they're up to. That's what they've come to. They've come to a huge culture war against the white male Christian population of America. And it's one of the reasons also I think that the left really likes the lockdowns is that it hurt small business so much. Because the only portion of America that isn't solidly big government is the independent entrepreneurial people of America, not the big corporations have always been big.
They might as well be two different parties, yeah.
And the lockdowns were just wonderful techniques for destroying the backbone of any opposition to major government, because it's destroying small businesses all over the place. Though it's not going to be total, so it'll be better. And that's all ending now because of the riots. No one believes any of this stuff anymore. So I'm basically just saying is that left and right, I think, are very meaningful ways of looking at one's orientation to politics in general and to basically your spiritual centers and how you look at the world. But what you're actually doing in politics is another dimension, policy dimension. And libertarians have it wrong to have totalitarianism on one side and freedom on the other. That's the wrong way of looking at it. I think libertarians have been always wrong about this, and I was wrong about it too.
Well, that is one dimension. That's not the dimension.
It's half a dimension.
That's not a good dimension.
That's not a dimension. Well, I'm saying that freedom is in the middle, and on the other side is the war of all against all and chaos. Is that you're basically having imposed order versus imposed chaos by multiform nature. So you have two factors. Hobbes's worst nightmare and Hobbes's solution is one part of the spectrum. Hobbes's nightmare and Hobbes's solution. That's it. And in between, in the middle, is Lockean world. That's freedom. And I think libertarians have been wrong about this all along. We don't understand the anarchy, the chaos of rioting and social disorder because we have been living in such peaceful societies for such a long time. We haven't had much of it in our societies, so we don't have much idea of how bad it can get when there is a war of all against all at the basic level. And that's where everybody is behaving like a criminal, or else criminal and victim over and over and over again. And that is a terrible society. That is about as bad as you can get. And almost anyone who has any sense would prefer to live in a tyranny to that world. However, much better than either is freedom. And we need to, and in the context of freedom, we need to have left virtue and right virtue to protect the innocents outside and to protect the insides as well, and have as many inside groups as possible. We can all live together. It's not an issue if you just give up the desire for tyranny on one hand or the itch to use chaos on the other. And the left has always been motions for chaos to get tyranny. That is what the left has been doing over and over there for revolution. They want to basically bring in disorder to disrupt the in-group and the hierarchy and completely change the nature of the in-group they're dealing with, whatever the in-group is. That is the left strategy. And the right strategy is to protect the in-group. So the alt-right is basically just socialists who don't want to engage in the left strategy for social change. What they want is to use the right strategy for social change, the rights strategy.
Well, right now, Trump is famously using a left strategy, which I would call shaking the box, the same thing as the, is the strategy of shaking the box what the left is doing?
Well, except that that's, I guess, beyond the scope of my competence at present. We should deal with that at another time.
I mean, one of the things that drives the left crazy about Trump is that he uses all of their strategies back at them.
Right.
I mean, when he's an asshole, it's because somebody's been an asshole to him.
Oh, sure. But that's it's often on the manners level. It's the manners level, though. We're not talking usually policy on when this is happening. We're just talking manners, and the left is they're so goody two shoes. You know, they're full of Ms. Grundys now. The left has Ms. Grundyism. You know, it used to be Mrs. Grundy was the.
Ms. Grundy now.
It's Ms. Grundy is the world we live in now, and it's oppressively stupid. It is oppressive and stupid. They've managed to be both, as all Grundys are. One of the fun things about leftists, and one of the reasons they're crazy, is because in the context of all this in-group, out-group stuff, they're classists. They want a stratified society. And they love, that's what a technocracy is, because it's based on credentialism and public education and putting people through the sorting machine of public education to get the good jobs in government. And that's their whole thing. So that's one of the things that define them now is the leftists generally hate non-college graduate working class America. Because these are the people who have failed, as they look at it, the credentialist system. Their system.
So why wouldn't they think of those people as outsiders? Why would they identify them as insiders?
Though they are, in one sense, leftists, in another sense, they're rightists, right? Because what they really want to do is set up an order that they control. And they've controlled that order for a long time of using...
Well, that just sounds like the freedom and authoritarian spectrum.
Well...
I guess...
Well, I don't know about that. They've used a class structure in a caste system. They're for a caste system. You know, this is the funny thing about everybody is that, you know, they talk egalitarianism, but there's never been a leftist who's been an egalitarian. Because any leftist who's a state socialist, as soon as you get into power, what's the main source of inequality? Those in power and those out of power. That's a huge inequality. It's far worse than any inequality in capitalist society, because the people out of power are really SOL. I mean, this is really it's an insane system.
Do you think a big sorting is happening right now? It's because the old labels, the old groupings, don't seem useful. So are people resorting themselves right now? What's the wisest strategy? To think more carefully about the possible positions?
I think we have to always think multidimensionally. That's the trick.
But so many people are confused about where they are in this, and part of it's because of the names. That is, a leftist is convinced to be a leftist and call himself a leftist because of one or two dimensions, and then he gets roped into all of these other assumptions and all of these other goals, and people start believing that they want those goals, want the goals that come with this package deal. I've watched it happen to a lot of my old liberal friends who, because they bought a few, they bought a few of the items that the hard left wanted, they've slowly been letting go of their liberal ideas. And it wasn't because of any major conscious decision they made. It was because of this, little compromises. Somebody, that has in the past been called the slippery slope. Where little compromises lead inevitably to bigger compromises, particularly if you don't know that you're doing them. That is, if they're happening on an unconscious level, and most people don't know why they're doing what they're doing, including me and you.
That's the case with every group, every position for everything, every ideology, every religion. No one has a complete understanding of the affiliation of their ideas. Though some of us who are really interested in philosophy try to track this stuff pretty carefully, whereas
Of
people with
course.
no interest in philosophy do not track this very well at all. And like I say, many of the reasons that leftists are leftists is because they're tribal, is that their tribe believes this and this, and their tribe is better than those people over there, which are awful. So they're behaving like right-wingers, but their explicit exoteric doctrine, esoterically they're right-wingers, exoterically they're left-wingers, and they're engaged in a strategy to bring in the outsiders in. That's what leftists are always doing. We shouldn't pretend that there is a group that doesn't have esoteric and exoteric distinctions. As far as I'm aware, there is no group that does not have this dynamic. That they have David Friedman used to make a big point about there are the reasons people believe something, and then there are excuses people believe for something. And what's really interesting in politics is when they give you a reason to do something, are they giving you the real reason they believe it, or are they giving the excuse? Right? They're trying to find some reason for you to go along, but they have it for another reason. And the reason, for instance, why do leftists really like welfare programs for the poor? Is it because they really want to help the poor? Probably not. Probably it's because they're the kind of people who fit in a system wherein helping the poor is really important. They're Pharisaic. They need to be seen as helping the poor. And this is a very cheap way of doing so. And it's also so happens to give them cushy jobs in the bureaucracy. Their kind get cushy jobs. Their kinds fill the ranks of, for instance, government bureaus. Democrats are largely fill the ranks of the federal bureaus, right? Federal government workers are generally Democrats and leftists. And why are they? It's in their class interest to be so. They're basically classist. But that's not the reasons they give, and many of their thought processes are not about that. It's just that they happen to dovetail very nicely. It's been often observed that people's ideologies often conform to their self-interest in funny ways. And I'm not saying that's not the case with anyone. I try to make mine less funny than theirs, because I try to be very explicit about all the reasons why one would be for freedom and not for something else. And that's been my stance from the beginning in the libertarian movement, is that we have to be smarter than everybody else, because there are too many traps out there, and people get caught in those traps, the traps of left and right. And the traps...
Well, it's true that one reason people who are outside, who would not describe themselves as libertarians, it's clear the minute you start talking with them, their fear is that it's radical. It's too radical. The idea that freedom has come to be seen as too radical. You just can't just have everybody running around doing whatever they want to do. That would be awful. That would be terrible. And it's not seen as a sensible middle ground position.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I object to libertarians calling it the extreme between that and totalitarianism. We have another dimension to all this. Is what we have is power centers versus lots of people and the use of force within those structures. A tyrant is a person who is at the core of the hierarchy of the in-group, basically has a one-way direction of power towards all the other people in the in-group. Mm-hmm. Chaos is very different. It's where all these people over here, they're all trying to do what the tyrant does. So you have 1,000 tyrants. Okay, what freedom is in between is, okay, let's stop doing those things that are tyrannical, whether by many or by a few. And so that's why it's a compromise in the middle, is that how many people get into the Tyranny Act? Well, we don't want tyrants. We actually have a workaround for that problem. So that's why I think the spectrum is like this, is just how many people are trying to be tyrants or trying to live at the expense of others. And we're saying, oh, we don't need to do that. But it's a very interesting compromise, and it's one of the reasons I see an affinity between libertarian ideas and Epicureanism, because the mainstream of ethical philosophy has been, up until Epicurus' time, was largely about virtue. And virtue is a compromise between extreme positions, but sometimes you could find a way around the usual compromises. We have another compromise, a better compromise between these extremes. And this better compromise is a kind of a lateral thinking move. And the Epicureans had that with regards to what you get involved, all the complexities of your life. I'm not saying it was a good idea, but that's what they were doing. And libertarians sort of offer a simple, another way of looking at it.
Well, help me a little more. I need a little more help on what you mean by compromise. Is there a reasonable compromise position between freedom and slavery?
Well, no, but that's not what we're trying to compromise between. We're trying to compromise between one person owning the other, or that person owning you, or one person killing the other, or that other person killing you. What's the compromise position between those two? Those are two options. Is that A can kill B or enslave B, or B can kill A or enslave A? Well, the compromise position between these positions, the options being two different people, not between slavery or killing, but between one person having this unilateral position to the other, this hegemonic position. The opposition, the compromise between A doing it to B or B doing it to A is neither get to do it. Is that we don't do the hegemonic thing.
That seems to be compromise of a different class than I don't want to be robbed of my possessions. I think we should be able to take all of your possessions and do something great with it in the state. And the compromise has been, we won't take as much as we want, but we'll take some. This guy loses. This guy actually gains. The middle point between these two, between the thief and the guy who wants to hold on to what he has, the middle point is this guy loses, this guy wins a little bit.
Yeah. And
that, you wouldn't describe that as a compromise, would you?
Well, it's a compromise, but it's the compromise with a false dichotomy, because there never is just one group wanting to take from you. There's many groups at the public trough trying to get your wealth for their ends. That's the reality of democratic government, is that you have all these groups trying to get to take as much as they can from the commons, which comes from all the tax funding, and they want to increase the taxes so they can get that some advantage. And so it's not a question of A, having this program to get from all these people out here, and the compromise being, okay, we won't take as much. It's A, B, C, D, E, and F, all these various groups, each wanting a piece of you. And so what you have here is that's a false dichotomy between just A and the masses.
But it's why we are where we are.
No, it's not actually.
It's why there's Social Security. It's why why there's a constant war, why the military, all of the things we find distasteful about government are the results of people who didn't want of it and people who did want to do all of this. And the compromise was, okay, we'll just do a little bit in the middle. And slowly by slowly, the state grows. The people who don't want it to grow, the people who do want it to grow, the compromise is, we'll just let it grow kind of slowly.
Well, but
you see what I'm saying? How do we evade that trap?
Well, I think you have to stop thinking about it in terms of those dichotomies, because it really isn't that. That isn't how we got what we got. We got it because of special interest politics and everybody trying to live at the expense of everybody else. And everybody says they want slavery. They call it freedom, but everybody wants to live at the expense of everybody else, and their group tries to get an in-group advantage. And that's how we get it. We get it because it's not, we want everything. I don't want anything taken away. It's, I want this, and he wants that, and she wants this, and they all get to work it out in this fight in democracy. And that's the nature of public choice, is that it's not just two pole positions. I don't want to be exploited and I want to exploit. It's between everybody saying, I want to exploit. Well, but we're not going to call it exploitation. We're going to all pretend we're free, and then we're all going to try to exploit each other. And we're going to compromise with each other's demands, because we can't all have it all. So we each get a little bit of a program here, we each get a little bit of program there. So the people who want protectionism get protectionism for their industry. The people who want welfare, who want handouts, get handouts. The people who want subsidized business get subsidized, but they don't get everything they want. They just get some of what they want, because they can't have it all, because there's economies of scale. But it's not freedom versus tyranny. It's everybody trying to live at the expense of everybody else, and that is the actual driver. It is not freedom versus tyranny. And freedom versus tyranny is what is the illusion that libertarians that we've lommed ourselves into, and we keep on. That's why we get nowhere.
What would be a reasonable? We need to talk more about this. What's I'm guessing that you have in mind some sort of alternate strategy to get these ideas across, or have these ideas exert some power over the way things develop. I mean, what use can be made of the insight?
There's probably a lot that can be made use of it. Libertarians have done very little with it because they're stuck with freedom and tyranny. But what you have to do is that you have to get people to realize, well, actually, was it Admiral Aqbar?
It's a trap.
That is the thing that the libertarians have to say. We've been fooled. We fooled ourselves. It's a trap. Over and over again, it's the same trap. And what we have to do is we have to see this as a grift. This is a strategy of con men, and it's a nation of con men, and we've turned ourselves into grifters, and we live an immoral life because of this grifter life that we're trying to live. And that's why everybody's going crazy, because you can call yourself a free person, but if you're living a grifter life, you're not living a free life. You're living a grifter's life. So what libertarians, what we offer is says, you've trapped yourselves. We're stuck. Why are you stuck? Because you're trying to do something that can't be done. So you're living a lie. Everything you do is a lie. Everything that you're trying, you're calling slavery freedom, and you're calling freedom an extreme. Okay? That's what we have to work with. Maybe Libertarian Party should not have run Jojo for president. Maybe they should have run Admiral Aqbar. Maybe it shouldn't be a snake hissing, "Don't tread on me." Maybe it shouldn't be a porcupine. Maybe it shouldn't be the Statue of Liberty as the symbol of libertarianism. Maybe it should be Admiral Aqbar, and he should say, it's a trap. That's what I think we need to say first and foremost, because it's a trap. And modern statism is a trap, and we're all caught in it. No one's exempt. And if we think if it's only about freedom versus tyranny, I think we're not going to see the whole picture. And we're not going to see the trap, because the trap isn't the compromises between freedom versus tyranny. The trap is everybody trying to live at the expense of everybody else. It is impossible. Bastiat called it a fiction, but it's really a con. It's a confidence game, and it has to stop.
Is it a matter of education? Is it a matter of gnosis? Can the change be affected in any planned way, or do we have to just hope things are flowing in the right direction?
Well, I don't think that libertarians have ever had a decent campaign for the minds of Americans, because I don't think libertarians understand the world as they actually see it. Because we keep on getting caught in false binaries, we don't understand what we're doing. And Libertarian Party is the most pathetic of all, because at least some people sort of understand it. But then I would say those would be the public choice people. I'd like to say, let's say that there's a number of libertarian theorists I really enjoy, and public choice is one of them, and the radical Rothbardians are another. I like a lot of these groups, but each one of them gets caught in weird things. Take Mike Munger. He's a public choice economist, basically a political scientist. He's brilliant. He's 20 times smarter than me, but he's caught in the trap. He thinks the way out is a universal income. He thinks it's the UBI. Okay, well, he just basically gave up his public choice credentials, and he might as well wear a kick-me sign on the back of his head. And every group does this because we're not addressing the reality of the world we see it, and we're not seeing that we've talked our way into a trap. Culturally, we're in a trap, and we're filled with traps. And, Harry Brown said it in his first book, in How I Found Freedom in the Unfree World. We have to avoid the traps of life, of unfreedom. But the thing is that's the way it is in politics. But the thing is, the reason people fall for the traps is not because the traps look bad. It's because the traps look good. You don't bait traps with copper lights. You don't bait traps with cow pies. You bait them with really nice cheese. Well, kids want cheese. We all want cheese. We all want the really nice little things, and every trap is filled with a nice little bait. And that's what we're always going for. We're pretending we have it every time we go into one of these traps. And then we think it's only difficulties of the world, and if it was just those damn Democrats or just those damn Republicans would give us what we want, then we'd have a better world. Well, no, that's not how it works. I think that libertarians have to see that we have to convince people that they've been fooled. It should be the easiest job in the world because there's nothing more obvious than the con job of modern life, except that it isn't obvious to people because they've been conned. A person who's been conned doesn't see that they're conned until they see it. And libertarians will go nowhere until they get pretty much everybody to see this is a con job.
Well, so we're in the position of the best friend who sees that his friend is trapped in an awful relationship. It's going to do nothing but bring him misery. But there's nothing you can say to that guy to convince. This happened with another. I'm not going to identify. I don't want to identify who it was. A woman I knew was in an awful relationship. It was clear to me. It was clear to everybody around her. So I thought it was going to be, I was in my 20s. What did I know? I thought it'd be a simple matter of sitting her down and explaining it to her, showing her why this guy was really, really not a good, somebody not to be involved with. I understand now that I was hopelessly naive because that never happens. You're never able to show somebody that they're making a mistake like that. So is that the position we're in? The libertarians are that poor best friend who simply that person. You're going to have to figure this out yourself. There's nothing I can tell you.
Well, maybe there are things you can tell them, but most of us aren't good at relationships, so we have a hard time convincing anyone. But I like that metaphor of bad relationships. That's kind of what the left and right, or that is the Republicans and Democrats, or Democrats and Republicans, have with the state. They have every one of them has a bad boyfriend, or that's their boyfriend is the state. The left likes it because the boyfriend is going to give them all the little goodies and make them, they'll be able to eat bonbons to the end of their time. They basically want to be the kept woman of the state. And the right, they want to be the housewife of the state. They really want the state to do a few things, and one of them is to be good policemen and be tough on crime, and they want to have a tough military, and they want to do a few things really well, but they don't want to do anything else. But they really do have an abusive boyfriend who keeps on killing people in funny and icky ways, and they can't get over it because they both love their idea of what their boyfriend is. They both have what Stendhal referred to as the illusion of love, is that they imagine perfections in the inamorata, and they impose that imagination onto the thing itself. They don't realize that Nietzsche was right about the state. The state is the coldest of all cold monsters. Everything it does is a lie. It says, I am the people. Well, that's not what the state is. The state is not the people. The state is a cold monster that turns people into worse people. And they don't understand that because they are in a bad relationship. America and the world is in a bad relationship to their states. They have several different ways of doing it because they look at the state slightly differently, and they are all conned.
What's the name for the people who want to just push everything to a catastrophe so it all boils over? There's a name for these people. They want to get things to get as bad as they can get so that it all collapses.
In the libertarian movement, we've had people like the survivalists and...
Could it be the accelerationists?
Accelerationists is a great term. That's a great term. But the thing is that you accelerate to tyranny or chaos often, and you don't usually end up with freedom at the end of an acceleration. You just end up with just a horror, an outrageous horror.
But you were just suggesting that the only way to get out of it is to have it finally get so bad that we can't ignore it.
Well,
right?
I'm saying we're there now. Maybe we're there now. The right knows the left is crazy, and the right is right. The left has always known that the right is kind of stupid. The left has always been right about that. The right is often very stupid and very dunderheaded and very narrow-minded. That's what the right is.
Well, the left, a lot of people in the left seem to have access to a mental realm that people of another sort of mindset don't. That is, it can't be an accident that so many writers and artists and creators have placed themselves in what they call the left, or the left, sort of the left-wing ideology. I guess there was a period when things change over time.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's an accident at all because of the nature of the human psyche. You know, Jonathan Haidt and Jordan Peterson both talk about this as just integral parts of the mindsets. This is part of sexual selection theory too, is that we like different kinds of lovers and different kinds of friends and so
And I
forth.
don't think it's a bug, by the way. I think it's a feature. It's we've all managed to leverage one another's strengths and compensate for one another's weaknesses. Yeah, so I don't think it's a problem. I don't think that's a problem, that we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and we've found ingenious ways to make the best of that.
Well, like I say, I don't think there's anything wrong with left or right, as long as left virtue and right virtue. But the problem with left and right in politics is that it lurches to left vice and right vice too easily. And the reason is it's in relationship to the state and the enticements the state gives. That's what I think is the problem. This is actually my first motto in libertarianism was, we are the disenchanters. We are the disenchanters, and our job is disenchantment. And the problem is that most people...
That's why we're so disagreeable.
Oh, yeah. Most people who enter politics are enchanters. Okay, those are usually two different jobs. And disenchanters don't usually get, there's not as much money in it. There's not as much wealth in disenchantment.
Oh, disenchanters have a habit of getting invited to drink the hemlock as well. Right?
Yes. So,
people don't like the disenchanters.
Yeah, but that's our job. We have to disenchant because we're all cast in a spell. Our society is under the spells of left and right in their relationship to tyranny and chaos. And we have to disabuse people of their illusions about the nature of the state and about the nature of their own affiliations with the state.
It's a trap!
Okay, well, that's enough for a podcast. Obviously, that conversation went on even longer, and it's long enough, I think. My name is Timothy Virkkala, Timothy Workman Virkkala. That's Workman with an I, not an O, and you can find me at workman.com and at Workman on various social media, especially at gab.com, no matter how many deplorables are there. Okay, I was talking with James Gill, the artist, and this episode of the Locofoco Netcast is now going to be labeled number 15. I recorded all of the previous before I talked with Stefan Kinsella and Michael Rechtenwald, which were episodes 13 and 14 respectively. Does that mean anything to anyone? I don't think it means anything to anyone. My ideas of left and right are evolving, but they don't really have much to do with Mr. Kinsella or Mr. Rechtenwald, though I really admire both and they've learned from both. What shall we do next? I'm not sure what we're going to do next, but maybe I'll be talking with Emil Fadef again. Or maybe Lee Wakes will help me interview somebody illustrious. There's a lot of options. But whatever you do, go to locofoco.net for the SoundCloud hosting. Find Locofoco Netcast on Apple, Google, or Spotify. And drop me a line. You can find me at workman.com. At Workman. Join Gab. Facebook is evil. YouTube is, well, let's not talk about YouTube since this is going on YouTube. And Twitter is just vile. For all the anti-Semites on Gab, Gab is better than Twitter and it's better than Facebook. That's my final pitch. Go to gab.com, sign up, find me, and look me up. I'm at Workman. That's Workman with an I, not an O. Thanks.